I recently got into exploring abandoned places most of the time. My friends and I are the only ones there. There were a few times where we ran into some skaters, tags, and the occasional junkie. We have been in some pretty sketchy situations. Here are some brief descriptions of my friends. Brad is a giant 6'6", well-built. Dean is average height and build. He's the prankster of the group. Jesse is, not talking shit here, but he's severely overweight. We were all 19 at the time, except Jesse, who was 26. On our most recent excursion, we were checking out this abandoned refinery on the outskirts of town. The walk to the main entrance was about 1.5 miles long, with lots of trees and bushes at the edges of the path. The bike trail, a neglected paved path, twists and turns almost every 100 feet, with bushes creating blind spots. We arrived before sunset, but it grew dark as we explored. Before we left, Jesse decided to climb the water tank stairs to see the top. He ascended about 50 feet before turning back. Being an asshole, I kicked the tank to scan, causing a loud booming sound. Then, I heard something fall and bang on the cement. Jesse immediately yelled, "What the fuck did you just do?" I shouted back at him to get his ass down before he falls. As soon as he got back down, we walked out the main entrance and onto the pathway. At this point, it's about midnight. Brad and I are paranoid about mountain lions being around here and just want to bail. But Dean suggests that we take the side path on the way back. Fuck off, Dean. I know you're just gonna disappear at some point and try to scare us. I already knew where that side path was, because we had gone there earlier that week, which is when we discovered this old refinery. It runs alongside the main path for about 60 feet, with only bushes between them before eventually connecting. This will be important to remember later on. After about 2 minutes of slow walking, was when I saw someone wearing a hoodie peering out from a tree behind us. What made it even more disturbing was that they seemed to be wearing a white porcelain mask. I started freaking out. "Hey, I saw you. Don't mess with us." "Come on out." Jesse, who was the closest, turned around and pointed his light at where I had seen the figure. But of course, there was no one there. Now, I thought I was going to have to explain myself to the rest of the group, but Dean saw him as well and began joking that you were going to leave Jesse behind if he didn't pick up the pace. As I mentioned earlier, Jesse was on the heavy side and had already exerted himself quite a bit from walking around the refinery, and he ended up falling way behind us. We had to slow down occasionally to keep him in sight. We're not complete assholes. After a few minutes of walking, I heard something crunching underfoot from somewhere within the trees. We then heard footsteps heading in our direction. At this point, I'm done. I booked it sprinting at full speed, while Dean and Brad run back to Jesse, who had the only light I get about a 1/4 mile up the path, when I realized I had made a big mistake, because now here I am, face to face with the hooded figure, who is now standing in the middle of the path and is staring me down through the hollow sockets of his mask. I turn around and run back. When I rejoined my friends, I see that Dean, Brad, and Jesse are all grouped together, not moving. After telling them about the guy I saw, we came to the conclusion that there had to be more than one out here roaming the forest, so we decided to stick together and keep an eye out in every direction. I was positioned in front, Brad to my left, Dean to my right, and Jesse behind us. We moved as silently as possible, constantly listening for any sounds. Every few minutes, we could hear at least 3 individuals moving through the forest. One remained out of sight behind us, while the other 2 sounded as if they were on a parallel path. This continued until the 2 pathways converged. Before this point, I had been certain that if we were to be attacked from behind, it would be by a single assailant, However, now they were all together. Approximately 5 minutes later, Jesse burst past us, and I turned to see the 3 masked men rapidly moving around the corner. All of them were brandishing what looked like metal pipes. We all got aboard the Nope, train to fuck this bill, and began running. We caught up to Jesse and ran the rest of the way back to our cars. Jesse hopped in his car, peeling out. Immediately, Brad and Dean piled in my car, which is a piece of shit, and won't start half the time, unfortunately for us. This was one of those times while I was trying to start my car. Dean and Brad grabbed my crowbar and tire iron from the back and kept an eye on the open entrance gate to the path. After 4 attempts, my car finally turns over. As we left, we saw the 300 figures standing by the gate, watching us leave. We haven't gone back there yet, but if I ever do, I'm definitely gonna bring more people, and each of us are gonna have a weapon. My boyfriend of 5 years, and I recently moved from Iowa to a new subdivision outside of a small town in Texas, where both of our families live. The house we bought is at the end of a cul-de-sac, with a huge field with nothing but trees behind it, so we were both pretty excited to be starting our new lives together, and to have bought our first house. We also have 2 dogs, who are basically our children. My boyfriend decided that he was going to go out with some new co-workers to the city about 35 minutes away. I didn't feel like going, because I'm more of an introvert and large crowds aren't my forte. Also, I usually love being home alone because I can binge scary movies that he never wants to watch. So, after getting home around 6-7 p.m. from the grocery store, I barricaded myself in my bedroom with my dogs and began my horror film marathon. As a side note, my dogs become on edge whenever my boyfriend isn't home at night, and sometimes they randomly bark at nothing. It freaks me out a bit, but I've become used to it over the years. We have one window in our room that's right next to the bed. I usually have the windows open at night, but on that night I only had it cracked, so I'm balls deep into some cheesy horror flick from the 80s. When the dogs start barking, I tell them to shut up, but just in case, I turn on the exterior light and look around. I saw nothing. It was around 11 by that point, and I was sure that my boyfriend would be gone for a couple more hours. No big deal. The dogs start barking again, and this time they don't stop. I slowly peek out the window. I didn't see anything until I spotted 2 eyes at the bottom of the window, peering up at me. No full face, not even a nose, just the eyes. The window was quite low to the ground, so whoever it was had to be crouching. I initially thought it was my boyfriend, as we sometimes scare each other, but never to this extent. Naturally, I tried to act unfazed. "Calvin, you're an idiot. Seriously, this isn't funny." The staring continued. "Haha, very funny. Now stop. You're freaking out the dogs." Then the eyes slowly began to move upward, until the person was standing upright. It was clear he was far too tall to be my boyfriend. I've always thought of myself as tough, and from watching so many horror films, I thought I would be able to deal with sketchy situations. That was until that very moment. I literally didn't move a muscle. The figure just keeps staring. I quickly fumble from my phone, finding my voice, and yell at this creep to leave and that I'm calling the cops. He just continues to stand there while I dial 911. I'm stammering over my words while I was speaking to the operator. When I hear something tap against the window, it is a large kitchen knife. He must have gotten the reaction he wanted from me, because a slow, sadistic smile appeared on his face. Knowing full well that the police were on their way, he took one large step back and stands there for what felt like forever, until taking another step slowly and deliberately, while maintaining the most bone-chilling smile. He does this until he reaches the fence, climbs over, never breaking eye contact, and I see him peering over the fence. Swung last time before disappearing into the night. The cops came, but there was no trace of him. Ever since that night, I've been terrified to stay home by myself. I will be the first to admit that this all could have taken place in my head. The mind is a freaky thing and can play some pretty trippy tricks on you. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad always told me that in life you should not be afraid of ghosts, fear the living, because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed suicide, and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments. The cabin was set to go in the market for sale in less than a month, and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with the realtor and lawyer. Considering the circumstances, I decided to take advantage of the cabin's upcoming vacancy. It was a chance to escape and clear my head. I left my job, packed my snowboarding gear, and with my dog, drove my dad's car, which he'd left me in his will, to our family cabin. Since my parents rented out the cabin when they weren't using it, I had the keys and alarm code, so I didn't feel the need to inform the rental management company of my stay. The first 2 days at the cabin were uneventful and normal. I spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and played PlayStation and listened to music during the evenings. I also did some drinking and smoking. Out on the balcony, I had stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much shut in, aside from the occasional outing to hit the slopes with my dog as company and DVDs and PlayStation as entertainment. I was quite content and started to feel relaxed. The cabinet itself was 2 stories. The bottom story behind the living room, a guest bedroom, along with a small kitchen upstairs, had another 2 rooms, along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time was spent in the living room, the kitchen, or the master bedroom. I had no reason to venture to the other rooms, and I always kept the doors leading into them. Shut open doors to dark rooms always creeped me out. Anyhow, the 3rd day came around, and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog. His name is Midnight, by the way, and he has also since passed, and then played some video games and watched some movies. That day was forecasted for a pretty heavy snowfall, so I didn't feel like trekking down the hill to the main road in my car and decided to stay in. This is where things begin to get a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins, aside from these 2, were over a mile away. Surrounding us was a forest of very tall pine trees. This particular detail will be important. Later on, from the past couple of days, I knew that both of these cabins were empty. I think I've given enough background. Now I'm going to jump into the strangeness around midday. While outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, and the footprints appeared relatively fresh, suggesting someone had been there within the last 20 to 30 minutes. I initially wondered if another person might be staying in a nearby cabin, perhaps as isolated as I was. Regardless, the tracks led away from my cabin, disappearing into the snow as they moved towards the denser section of trees. I didn't dwell on it, and went back inside. As night fell, I prepared for bed. Midnight was on the bed with me when his ears suddenly perked up. He then quickly jumped off the bed and raced downstairs to the living room, leaving me to lie in bed in silence. I was kind of freaked out. I could hear him moving around downstairs, back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs and started to do his doggy dance, which was his way of telling me that he had to go pee. Shit. Well, fine, I couldn't say no to him. So we both went downstairs to the outside driveway so he could do his business. The only thing is, he didn't have to go. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull his leash, trying to drag me off somewhere. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the footprints had been earlier. He also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up to the roof. Now, after he figured out that he was not going to go where he wanted to, he sat himself down and just stared into the dark, which was a bit unusual for him. Perhaps there was an animal somewhere out there in the forest he wanted to chase down, but fuck that. I didn't want to chance anything, so I pulled him back inside, and we both went back upstairs around 30 minutes later. I was lying in bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. I tried to rationalize that. It could have been a pine cone falling from a tree, or maybe a harmless crater from the forest was running around up there. But here's the thing. The steps seemed to be spaced apart at a length too wide to be a small animal or even a man.
You notice things like that when you're in an isolated setting like this. It was really getting under my skin. Midnight also heard the noise. I was quick to run to the balcony screen door, expecting me to let him out. Alright, you know what? I'm a tough guy, and at the time I considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself.
So I grabbed my coat and my shoes along with my cigarettes and flashlight and went out to the balcony. As soon as I was outside, I lit up my cigarette and I started canvassing the roof with my flashlight. Nothing was there, and the snow on top looked undisturbed. Must have all just been in my head, right? But what about Midnight hearing the noise as well? Maybe he was feeding off my fear and paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again. I turned off the flashlight. It allowed my eyes to adjust to the darkness. I was just staring at the forest next to our cabin. That's when I saw it in a tree that was a bit taller than our cabin, and around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position between two branches. He looked very tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet. It was extremely thin. It was squatted on one branch, and its abnormally long white arms were extended above its head, holding onto another branch above it. Its mouth hung open, expressionless. What the hell is that? I questioned, unsure if my eyes deceived me. As I stood transfixed, Midnight, my dog, began to pace behind me, barking softly, yet the creature remained still. I extinguished my cigarette, tempted to shine my light on it, but an instinct warned me against it. Cautiously, I backed into the room, called Midnight inside, and shut the door. Only then did I dare to aim my light in its direction. But it was gone. I drew the curtains and returned to bed. Later that night, a soft tapping on the screen door, like fingers strumming glass, broke the silence. It was consistent and did not stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but wouldn't go anywhere near it. The strangest part was, I had the feeling like something was inviting me to open the door, but at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice inside my head, telling me to stay where I was. I eventually passed out. When I woke up the next morning, it didn't take me long to pack everything up and get the hell out of there. In 1984, when I was 8 years old, my family moved to Allenstown, New Hampshire. Our house sat at the end of a dirt road near Bear Brook State Park. In front of our house was an open field that had small tree patches here and there. After what I estimate to be about 50 yards, the field ended and the forest began. One day, my friend and I wanted to go exploring further than we had before. We were very familiar with the first acre or two of forest. We usually roamed around in and wanted to cover some new ground that day. Shortly after passing the usual landmarks, we came upon a dirt ridge. Beyond that, we saw a clearing with a row of 4 cabins. The area included a shallow pond, a dense wall of trees on either side, patches of bushes between the cabins, and a few cars that looked like they had been torched. The cabins had that typical lined wood look, with flat rooftops. When we first discovered this place, we thought it was an abandoned resort or something. However, when we peered through the windows, most of the cabins contained furniture and beds. There was no one in sight. I remember feeling creeped out as we moved from cabin to cabin, and I would soon discover why behind one of the cabins was a dirt bed with half-buried animal bones scattered across it. If these remains were from hunting, surely they wouldn't want vultures buzzing around their resort. I thought it was odd, but not too alarming. My mom always told me to stay away from dead animals because they could be carrying some kind of disease, so we didn't feel the need to go poking around the pet cemetery. Curiosity got the better of us, and we returned a week later. During our second visit, I noticed a peculiar lack of signs or markers indicating ownership, or if it was a private campsite. There were also no roads leading to the property. This time, a sense of being watched enveloped us, though I saw no one at first. As we prepared to leave, a tall man in a dark jacket emerged from the trees, running towards us. He was about 100 meters away, a rifle slung over his back. "Hey, what are you doing here?" he shouted. My friend and I immediately took off running. The man pursued us, unslinging his rifle and shouldering it as if intending to fire. We scrambled over the dirt ridge and ran without stopping until we reached my house. We never told my parents or anyone else about the incident. We didn't want to be restricted on future explorations, but I don't remember ever going back there. What happened to us could be chalked up to a couple of kids trespassing on private property. But a year later, hunters found a 55-gallon metal drum in a wooded area close to where those cabins were. Inside were the bodies of a woman and a young girl. At the time, the victims were not identified, and the case remained unsolved. That was until 15 years later, when a second drum was discovered containing the bodies of 2 more girls, about 100 yards away from where the first one was found. One of the victims was only 11 months. Soil DNA testing later linked to the victims to a serial killer named Terry Rasmussen. I never got a good look at the man who chased us away from the cabins that day, so I can't say for sure if it was him or not. But when I think back to that place, I think about how some people say that they never found all of Terry's victims, and I always remember those bones we saw scattered about. I honestly don't think 8-year-old me could tell the difference between animal and human bones.
I heard a story on your channel about the 1977 Oklahoma Girl Scout murders and are brought to the surface a story from my own family's history. These events happened before I was born. Had things played out differently, I wouldn't be here today. The year was 1981. The Keddie resort was a sleepy getaway.
Nestled in the mountains of Northern California, it was the kind of place folks went to fish, drink, and forget about their troubles. For a while my family was staying at cabin 28. My grandmother Sue, her 5 children, and a couple of their friends. They were just enjoying their stay and doing the typical things you would do at a cabin in the woods. They were completely unaware that something evil was making its way through the trees, toward the resort, and to cabin 20. No one knows exactly what took place on the night of April 11th, 1981, but it was theorized that someone, possibly more than one person, knocked on the cabin door between 10 a.m. and p.m. Investigators believed that the individuals were known to my grandmother, and she allowed them to enter the cabin. Once inside, the assailants attacked. There was a struggle. Sue, my uncle, John 15, and his friend Dana 17, were bound with wire, then struck and stabbed multiple times with a hammer and knife. The following morning, around 8 a.m., one of the daughters returned from a sleepover at a friend's cabin, only to discover the bodies in the living room. Screaming, she ran to the neighbors for help. Upon the police's arrival, it was confirmed that one of the children, my 12-year-old Aunt Tina, was missing. Her remains were found 3 years later. It's theorized she may have witnessed the living room events that night and was subsequently abducted and murdered in cold blood. Due to a botched investigation, no arrests were ever made, and the murders remain unsolved to this day. There's much more to this story, and many questions surrounding this case have never been answered. I've summarized things a bit because these are my family members we're talking about, and I can't bring myself to go into further detail about their horrifying deaths. I will tell you that the girl who discovered the bodies the morning after is my mother, Sheila Sharp. People that I've shared this story with have made comparisons to the Friday the 13th movies, and I can definitely see why. However, I think most horror movie fans will view Jason Voorhees as cool or badass, but I don't share their enthusiasm. Jason Voorhees is a fictional character, but the influences that created him are very real. In my case, it's hard for me to separate fiction from reality. I can't watch those films and not think about how all those deaths would affect so many families like they did mine.
There a couple of years ago, I found myself in a very disturbing situation. I was getting off of work at my internship in Charlotte, North Carolina. It had been snowing all day. For those of you who live in the South, you know it's a big deal when snow is even forecasted, and grocery stores are rated. The night before, I decided to get some groceries, since the mayhem had ended and only people like me with trucks or all-terrain vehicles could get around.
So I went to Walmart, got the groceries I needed, and started making my way back to my truck. It had begun to snow harder, and there was already 5 to 7 inches on the ground. It was around noon. At this point, I was daydreaming about sledding and watching movies over the next couple of days with my then girlfriend, now wife. Just as I almost reached my truck, I was jolted by someone grabbing my arm. I turned around to see an older-looking woman, maybe 5, 6. She asked if I had any cigarettes. I don't smoke, so I told her that I didn't, and turned back to my truck again. She gently tugged on my arm and said that she had just arrived from Alabama on a bus with her granddaughter and dog. She was in town for breast cancer treatments and needed money for a hotel. I honestly told her that I had no money on me. I don't like contributing to people's potential drug habits and would rather buy them food if that's what they really need at this point. She asked, "Do you know the area well?" Wanting to get out of the situation, I lied and said I didn't, thinking that she would leave me alone. I was surprised when she said, "Oh, okay, well, since the weather is so bad, will you drive me to my hotel so I can meet with my granddaughter? They're in the lobby waiting. It's right up the road here. I can show you." Being a Christian, I was taught to help people. I already felt guilty about the white lie I had told, even though everything in me was screaming, "No." I agreed. I was raised on the rule, never judge a book by its cover. Plus, I'm 6 feet tall. I figured I could handle her if things got dicey. So against all odds, she hopped into my truck, and we took off. The next thing I knew, she was smoking a cigarette, and I politely asked her to put it out. I immediately noticed my first red flag. She had asked for cigarettes earlier, despite clearly having some. She complied, tossing the cigarette out the window. As we drove towards the hotel, I was on high alert, mentally preparing for the worst, when I saw her fumbling through her purse, glancing at me from the corner of her eye. I interjected. "Just so you know, I have a gun in my truck, so please don't try anything crazy." I did in fact have a shotgun that I had forgotten to remove from my back seat a couple of days prior. Wouldn't have been helpful if she had pulled a gun from her purse and aimed it at me, but she wasn't aware of that. She instantly stopped rummaging through her purse and instead pulled out her cell phone from her jacket. She looked at me and said, "Actually, do you mind taking a detour? I need to pick up some money from a friend." The red flags were now screaming, but I couldn't go against my programming in that moment. I told her it was fine, but we should make it quick, because I needed to get back home. She then dialed someone and said, "Yeah, this guy is coming to bring me to get the stuff."
You're ready, right?
It was at this point that I asked to talk to the person. The man on the phone sounded like he had been chain smoking since birth. I asked him his name and whether he knew of any hotels nearby. He stumbled over his words and then said he had to go. I should have taken the hint and kicked her out of my truck, especially after watching so many horror films, but fearing that she might be telling the truth, I continued, "It's funny how you overlook things like, I came from Alabama with my granddaughter and her dog, but I have a friend who's gonna loan me money even though I asked you for some in the parking lot. And it was possible, but extremely fishy. And why didn't she call her friend to come pick her up from the store?" We soon turned down a street, and I saw a police car parked off to the side. I considered dropping her off with the officer, but I would feel awful if she was actually telling the truth. As we passed the cop, a strange, eerie smile formed on her face, and she said, "Glad he's here now. I feel safe." As we entered the apartment complex, the rundown appearance of the place immediately struck me as unsettling, akin to a hub for heavy drug trafficking. Even as I parked in the snow, an intense uneasiness washed over me. When she went inside to get her friend, promising to return shortly, I felt a strong urge to escape. My discomfort was evident, and she noticed my desire to leave. She then sneered, accusing me of being a horrible person if I abandoned her in such weather, especially given her condition. Her words ignited a spark of anger within me. I had gone out of my way to help her, doing more than most people would. As I waited, a chilling thought crept into my mind. What if she returned with a gun or something even worse? At that moment, I saw 3 men approaching my truck. I then realized I had to leave right away. She had set me up to be robbed, or worse. These men were big, and one of them was hiding something behind his back. I put my truck in reverse and took off. Thank God for 4-wheel drive. Looking back, I saw them chasing me and noticed that one of the men was holding a crowbar. I don't know what would have happened, but looking back, I can see how naive I was. There was no hotel anywhere near that area. The nearest one was about 20 minutes away. Had I waited, they would have likely beaten and robbed me, possibly even killed me. I thank God every day that I escaped and was able to marry my girlfriend. I've never returned to that Walmart or that area since a couple of months later. I told a coworker this story, and he said that same woman tried the same thing with him a year earlier, but he declined her outright smart move on his part. I had been debating whether to share this story, but I figured I might as well. This happened one day when I was probably 4 or 5 years old. We lived in a tiny town in North Carolina. The entire county had a population of roughly 5,000 people. We lived 10 minutes from the main township, and our neighbors were family, and they lived about an acre away in each direction. We knew everyone, and everyone knew us. When I was young, I had a particular fear of leaving my curtains up at night. I had to have my windows completely covered before I could fall asleep. I was too young to verbalize it at the time, but the idea of waking up with someone looking through my windows absolutely terrified me. After this incident, that fear only intensified. We lived pretty much by ourselves out in the sticks. If anyone came onto our property, we would usually know who they are. 9 times out of 10. So when my father and older brother started spotting boot prints that didn't belong to them, we all got a bit nervous. Living as far out as we did meant the police, fire department, or EMS would take much longer to reach us. My father taught my older brother, sister, and myself how to handle guns. Even at this early age, I was pretty proficient with my BB gun. Over the course of several days, they started noticing more boot tracks in the woods. Items were being moved around in the barn, and one morning the entry door was left open. Though we couldn't tell if anything was missing, it was clear that someone was snooping around at night. Since I was so young, my parents didn't want to frighten me, but my brother did. He told me that someone was creeping around the yard at night, and that one night I would wake up and find him in the house, to put it lightly. My brother was a bit of an asshole. He always made fun of me for not sleeping with my windows uncovered. He told me that I needed to face my fears, and during this time, when someone was definitely sneaking around our property, he convinced me to sleep with my curtains drawn back. I hated to admit it, but I craved his approval more than anything, and so I agreed. So, one night I left my curtains open. It took a long time to fall asleep, but eventually I nodded off. I've always been a light sleeper. Even the slightest gust of wind would wake me. I'd often wake up 4 or 5 times a night. That night I heard the porch just outside my window creaking. I tried to ignore it, thinking that it was just my imagination. Then, a shadow passed over the light that was coming from the lamp outside my window. I opened my eyes and sat up. There was someone standing by the window, hands cupped against the glass. This was literally my worst fear come true in the process of running out to my room. I pissed myself. I ran straight to my parents' bedroom. At the same time, the doorknob to the front door began to rattle. The intruder was trying to get inside. I managed to reach my parents' bedroom and told them what happened. My dad grabbed his gun and flashlight and headed outside. After nearly half an hour, my father came back in. His face was sweaty and pale. He sent my brother and I to bed, but we both sat up and listened. My father told my mom, "You found a tarp and a bunch of blankets set up about a half a mile into the forest, just off a logging trail. Someone had been there for quite a while." My dad apparently tore the encampment apart after losing sight of him. The police came and took statements from my parents, then looked through the forest, but couldn't find anything. They figured that the guy wouldn't be back anytime soon, and we never saw him again. Now I always sleep with my windows covered, no exceptions. In 1979, when my mother was attending college in North Carolina, one day she noticed someone was following her in a big car as she walked home one night from class. She tried her best to ignore it at first, but when it became obvious that she was being stalked, she became frightened. Thankfully, she saw a police car parked at the gas station nearby and ran to it as soon as she did. The car that had been following her peeled off. Once she thought she was in the clear, she continued her walk home. Everything seemed okay until she had to cross a small footbridge into her neighborhood. Once she was over it, that same car came ripping around the corner. The man rolled his window down and tried to make small talk and asked if he could give her a ride home. "No thanks," she said, and started to turn away, at which point he reached over and grabbed her, then tried to pull her into the car. She managed to jerk away from him and ran to a house that was across the street, and the car peeled away. 2 weeks later, she awoke to the sound of her roommate screaming. When she got up and walked out of her room, she saw the same man standing in the middle of her living room. staring at her. She said the look on his face was calculating. The roommate then screamed, "Who the fuck are you? And what are you doing here?" He turned to her and replied, I forgot my guitar," and grabbed the guitar that was leaning on the wall. The roommate shouted, "That's my guitar," and he threw it to the ground and ran out. After reporting this event to the apartment manager, the manager told my mother that some guy had come by a few days earlier, claiming that he was a family friend of hers and wanted to surprise her. So the apartment manager gave him pretty much every detail about my mom, where she worked, where she went to school, and her weekly routines. Of course, my mom flipped out on her, as anyone would. Even back then, it wasn't cool to just share personal information about other people to strangers. That was the last she ever saw of him, until several years later, she was reading a book about notorious serial killers in America and read the story of Mike DeBarlaban. He had traveled all over the country, sexually assaulting and murdering some of his victims. He was also a notorious counterfeiter. When she flipped the page and saw this man's picture, she freaked out. It was him, that same man who followed her in the car, the same man who showed up in her apartment. He was a serial rapist and a murderer. It's impossible to look back and not come to the conclusion that he was targeting my mother. When she told me this story, I started doing my own research. Records show that Mike DeBarlaban was in the North Carolina area at the same time that my mom was attending college. There, the victimology shows that he targeted women around 18 to 19 years old, which was my mother's age at the time. He died in 2011. Had things played out differently, I wouldn't be here today. I'm glad that he dropped his pursuit, but I wondered more often than I should as to why. I can only assume that his initial plan failed, and it would have been too easy to tie him to any crime committed against my mother. So it was a calculated decision to move on his next victim. Lori Jensen was not so lucky. In the spring of 2005, I was driving from Maryland to Florida for a major business conference. I left my friend's house in Richmond in the wee hours of the morning. I had to stop around 5 hours in AM in North Carolina to fill up one tank and empty another. I had just gotten back in the car and turned the ignition when there was a knock on the passenger side window outside. There was an older woman in her 50s. I quickly locked the doors and cracked the window just enough to hear her tell me that she needed a ride. Just a few exits back up I-95, I kept repeating that I wasn't heading that way, but she wasn't accepting no for an answer, and every hair on my neck was starting to stand up. I thought about going back in the store, but to be honest, I wasn't sure if I would make it. Finally, I held up my cell phone and said that if she didn't leave me alone, I was calling the police. That's when the situation changed completely. She apologized and walked away. I was shaking too much to drive, so I took a couple of minutes to collect myself. Before pulling out to go back to the highway, that's when I saw a car pulling out from behind the store. The lights hit in just the right way, and I was shocked to see that it was the same woman behind the wheel. I recovered real fast after seeing that and pulled out of the station behind her. That's how I saw her get back onto the interstate, but going south and the exact opposite direction of where she so desperately had to go. I got around her, and as I passed her car, she locked eyes with me. Her stare was incredibly cold, and I still have chills to this day thinking back on it. Since then, no matter what I'm doing or where I am, I never get in the car without making sure that locking the doors is a first priority. I also never crack the windows for anyone, except for maybe a police officer. Anyone who approaches my car gets yelled at through the window with my hands on the wheel just in case a quick getaway is needed. There was a story on your channel Some time ago, about a young lady who was on vacation at a Disney resort in South Carolina, where she encountered a disturbing individual wearing a vintage Mickey Mouse mask. I want to make something perfectly clear. My experience has no connection to hers, and I'm not suggesting that it was the same person she encountered, but I have also seen someone wearing that God-forsaken mask as well. It's something that you never forget. Rumor has that Disney discontinued that mask because it was just too terrifying for children. The fact that it was ever considered appealing to begin with remains a mystery to me. But enough pretext, let's get into the story. I still remember this like it was yesterday, even though it happened all the way back in 2004, the year I began first grade. The first day of school always brings some excitement and nervousness, but in my opinion, nothing compares to your very first day of school. The day that you leave daycare and kindergarten behind and officially enter the public education system. For some, that alone might sound like the start of a scary story, but for me, most of my sparse memories of that day are quite pleasant. My teacher was lovely, my classmates were mostly nice, and the classroom felt like an exciting place to learn. I'd even say my first day of elementary school was fun, unfortunately the same. It cannot be said for the bus ride home, since I was the only kid from my neighborhood attending that school. My bus stop was not only the last one on the route, but it also was created just for me. My parents and principal had given me very specific instructions on where it was, so I would know where to be dropped off. I also knew that one of my parents would be waiting for me at the stop to make things easier. After all, I was only 6 years old. The trouble started when we got to the second to last stop, and I was the only kid left on the bus. "Hey, you get off the bus!" The driver barked. It wasn't just the volume, but the sharp, stern tone that startled and confused me. Not only were my parents nowhere in sight, but the neighborhood looked completely unfamiliar. When I tried to explain this, the driver only got angrier. "Get off right now, or you'll never be allowed to ride the bus again." Her words filled me with dread. I was a quiet, reserved kid who hated confrontation. My father, the only driver in our family, worked downtown, and my mom wasn't comfortable letting me walk alone. The school bus would be the only way I could get to and from school. The thought of being banned from running it on my very first day was terrifying. Scared into silence, I got off the bus without another word. I regretted it immediately as the bus drove away. Though my parents had drilled my home address into me, I navigated the world by landmarks, trees, lawn decorations, house roof colors, and even cracks in the sidewalk, but never street signs. Not till I was around 10. As I took in my surroundings, the dread returned. The neighborhood was quaint and peaceful, but completely foreign to me. I was a shy, soft-spoken 6-year-old girl who was lost, terrified and alone. Well, not entirely alone, as I made my way aimlessly down the sidewalk with tears welling up in my eyes. I saw someone standing in the alley between two houses on my left. They were severely out of place. There was someone wearing dark clothing, a baggy jacket, and a black and white Mickey Mouse mask. Its soulless eye staring directly at me. As soon as I saw him, I burst into tears, closing my eyes. Seconds later, I heard familiar voices calling to me. It was two twin boys who rode my bus. They were a couple of grades above me. They had gotten off at the same stop and had begun to make their way back home when they heard me crying and quickly came back. I looked back to the alleyway, but the masked man was gone. "What are you looking for?" one of them asked, and I saw a man wearing a mouse mask standing there just a second ago.
"Well, there's no one there now. You probably just saw something because you were scared." After asking me a few more questions, they quickly came up with a plan. One of them would stay with me while the other went home to get their dad. After a few minutes of standing there and me nervously looking back to the now empty alleyway, a beige car pulled up beside us.
The boy that stayed with me said his father would take me home and open the rear passenger door for me. I saw his twin brother in the back seat gesturing for me to get in, but my worries weren't over just yet. My parents also told me about stranger danger, and I was already shaken to my core because of what I saw in the alley. The thought of getting into a car with a man I had just met and giving him my home address made me want to cry, but I knew if I didn't, I would remain lost. That fear was the only reason I got into the car and told him where I lived. The drive was much shorter than I expected. I'd been dropped off just a couple of blocks from my street, still shaking and full of adrenaline. I felt no relief. It wasn't until I was home and safely on my grandfather's embrace that I could finally relax. To say my parents were furious would be an understatement. The school took the incident seriously, and as soon as they found a replacement, the driver was fired. Neither I nor anyone else had another experience like that. Again, my claims about seeing someone in a Mickey Mouse mask were basically dismissed as a hallucination. Looking back, I sometimes feel embarrassed, especially since I was only a 10-minute walk from my house. Then I remember I was just 6 years old when that driver threatened to ban me from the bus. I was, and still am, tall for my age, so she might have thought I was older, but no child deserves to be spoken to like that, especially on their first day of school. I'm forever grateful to those boys for caring enough to help. Otherwise, who knows what might have happened to me that day. For years I've questioned if I actually saw a man wearing that Mickey Mouse mask that day. I suppose it's possible that it could have been my imagination, but I think it's more likely that it was someone trying to break into one of those houses, but to a lost, frightened, little girl, and might as well have been the devil himself standing there. There's always a reason to be afraid,